The James Chambers Show uses cuss words. Deal with it. Like an adult. Welcome to the James Chambers Show. I'm your host for this podcast, James Chambers. Before we dig in, I want to start this show by offering a heartfelt thank you. Thank you all so much for listening to or downloading this podcast. The JC Show is here to educate, agitate, and aggravate, and to have a little fun in the process. We appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you like the show, please share it with others and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Your likes and shares are the only way programs like this one get off the ground. We welcome your thoughts and comments. What are we doing well? What could we do better? Are there topics you would like us to cover? Comment on this channel or tweet us at RealJCShow or email the show at realjcshow2017@gmail.com. And again, thank you. It seems as though every week is a big news week anymore. When every week is a big news week, it's hard to know where to begin when truly massive sets of events occurs. I'll do my best to skim the surface of the week's significant events, and then we'll touch on why some of those events are so important. First and foremost, we have a huge development in the Mueller-Trump campaign Russia saga. The independent counsel, Robert Mueller, a lawyer, former U.S. attorney for both California and Massachusetts, and former FBI director under Presidents George W. Bush and Obama, handed down the first set of indictments in the Russia probe on Monday, October 30th. Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and his personal aide and protege Rick Gates were both arrested by the FBI and charged with conspiracy against the United States, conspiracy to launder money, being an unregistered agent of a foreign principal or government, and that's for their lobbying on behalf of the Ukraine and then President Viktor Yanukovych, false and misleading statements, and 7 counts of failure to file reports of foreign bank transactions. Through various means, they moved more than $75 million to the U.S. and laundered more than $18 million of those dollars. A third person, George Papadopoulos, who was an unpaid intern and advisor for the Trump campaign, pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about his contact with Russian representatives or agents during the 2016 campaign. And there's just so much to unpack in this story that it's just not realistic to do it in this setting. But suffice it to say, these indictments are going to be the first of many, many more to come. Mueller did a very thorough job of outlining his case, and the charges are laid out in such a manner as to avoid a potential presidential pardon. Interestingly, the alleged criminal offenses against Manafort and Gates took place before the presidential election. Now, right-wing media has leached onto that talking point in an attempt to discredit Mueller and the investigation and to call for his ouster. Now, recall that President Trump fired FBI Director James Comey supposedly for his handling of the Clinton email debacle, and also because Comey rejected the president's attempts at swaying his leadership of the Bureau in favor of Trump. Now there's talk of firing the special counsel, investigating potential criminal activity by the Trump associates during the campaign. That is highly suspect. Now, talk show host and rejected Ken doll model Sean Hannity is, of course, one of the loudest noise cannons, claiming that there is no equal justice in this country if it's okay to investigate the Trump campaign and not invoke a special counsel to investigate Hillary's camp for partially funding the Steele dossier. Now, you may recall that particular dossier was full of salacious claims, and not all of the information has been verified to be true. Now, to clarify, yes, Hillary's camp did help fund the creation of that dossier, but they weren't the first. Prior to their involvement, a conservative newspaper, the Washington Free Beacon, created and funded the project through a company called Fusion GPS. So let's just cut through the bullshit surrounding this issue. It's opposition research. That's it. Trump has extensive and well-documented ties to Russia through his business dealings. There is nothing illegal about funding research to dig up dirt on a political rival. Sebastian Gorka, who is an alt-right white nationalist and a presidential advisor nonetheless, claimed that funding this research was tantamount to treason and worse than what the Rosenbergs did, he claims, and they got the chair. Now, this is utter lunacy, communicating with Russian businessmen, journalists, and politicians in an attempt to dig up possible damning material against a political rival. Yeah, well, okay, while dirty, is par for the course. It is not the same as potentially colluding with a hostile foreign government in an attempt to change the outcome of an American election. Don't be fooled and don't be confused on this one. These two things are not the same. Now let's turn our attention to other political news. Every good Bernie Sanders supporter will tell you that the 2016 Democratic presidential primary was rigged in favor of Hillary Clinton. We now have testimony that, well, we were exactly right. The former interim DNC chairperson, Donna Brazile, claims in her forthcoming book and in a piece published in Politico magazine that the Clinton campaign had effectively taken over the finances of the DNC. The party was broke and in debt after the election of Barack Obama. Hillary's campaign swooped in, cleared 80% of the DNC's debt, and then took over the budgeting for DNC operations. The money situation gets a little complicated, but the gist goes like this. Donors to the Clinton camp who maxed out their individual contributions would then write a much larger check to the DNC in accordance with FEC and IRS guidelines. That money would go to the state DNC branch first, be moved to the national DNC, and then be immediately transferred to a fund called, well, the Victory Fund. Supposedly, that money would be spent on whoever won the primary. The Clinton campaign had control of all of those finances. In a story published on May 2nd in 2016, Politico referred to this arrangement as essentially money laundering for the Clinton campaign. And that, of course, didn't sit well with either the DNC or the Clinton camp. Being reported in that way certainly casts a pall on their activities. Brazile further described her discoveries like this. I at last found the document that described it all. The joint fundraising agreement between the DNC, the Hillary Victory Fund, and Hillary for America. The agreement specified that in exchange for raising money and investing in the DNC, Hillary would control the party's finances, strategy, and all the money raised. Her campaign had the right of refusal of who would be the party communications director, and it would make final decisions on all other staff. The DNC was also required to consult with the campaign about all other staffing, budgeting, data, analytics, and mailings. So there it is. Clinton had a lock on the DNC. Sanders had no chance. We all knew something like this was going on during the election, but I, for one, didn't know to what extent the channels of power had been diverted from the party to a single campaign. Knowing that none of this was illegal, immoral maybe, but subverting the will of the voters, that's definitely the case. And it's too soon to speculate, but a case could be made that if Bernie had won the nomination, we would not have the dumpster fire of an administration that we are now being subjected to. So, on to more news from the Hill. Tax reform. The House Republicans released their new tax overhaul bill this week to much acclaim or harsh reproach, depending on where you stand politically. Basically, this new tax bill is just tax cuts couched in the blanket of reform. Here are some of the details on the bill, and this is from Axios. Don't tune out. I'm going to throw some numbers at you. This increases the standard deduction from $63,500 up to $12,000 for individuals and $12,000 to $24,000 for married couples. Okay. The individual tax brackets, those are changing from 7 brackets to 4. 25% rate starting at $90,000 for married couples and $45,000 for individuals. And everybody below that pays 12%. 35% rate starting at $260,000 for married couples and $200,000 for individuals. The highest tax bracket being 39.6% rate starting at $1 million for married couples and $500,000 for individuals is essentially unchanged. This makes no changes for deductions for charitable contributions, but, well, wait for it. Elimination of student loan and medical expense deductions and the adoption tax credit. You got student loans? You're screwed. Got medical expenses? You're screwed. Just don't bother adopting. Good news, it doesn't change the contribution rules for 401ks, and that had been on the table. This also repeals the state and local tax deductions. And people can still write off the cost of state and local property taxes up to $10,000, but say goodbye to SALT deductions, and that's state and local tax deductions. So do you live in a higher tax state? You're screwed. Most of these states, by the way, tend to be blue or Democrat-held states. So, wealth redistribution from the rich to the poor is stealing, but wealth redistribution from blue to red, well, that's just fine. It also doubles the estate tax exemption immediately and repeals the tax in 6 years. And now this is a fun one. If you have an estate worth more than $5.5 million, don't worry, no estate tax for you. Now it's only applicable to estates worth more than $11 million. And even then, if you can hang on and don't croak for 6 more years, you won't pay anything. Now let's just go to business taxes briefly. This lowers the corporate tax rate by nearly half to 20% and lowers the rate for pass-through entities, which are mostly small businesses that report their taxes like individuals, and that brings that to 25%. There's just a whole lot more involved, but I hope these highlights will shed some light on the approach being taken. This is just old-fashioned trickle-down economics with a few bones thrown to the unwashed masses so we don't take up pitchforks. So let's just sum it up. Winners, big corporations. You get your tax burden cut nearly in half. The biggest one-time cut in history, mind you. Money held overseas? Oh, don't worry your pretty little heads about that. Your tax burden is going from 35% repatriation rate to 12% because you guys have it so hard. The super rich, you just got handed a huge gift. No more death tax for you. You can just pass all your wealth down to your ingrate kids who will never have to work a day in their lives. Such fun! And here's the icing. You can keep your deductions for charitable gifts. Ooh, and there's one more. And this one's a doozy. No more alternative minimum tax. Yep, that's right. The one most effective way we have to prevent tax dodging by the super rich is going away. As an example, we have tax records on our billionaire president, Donald Trump, for 2005. If there were no alternative minimum tax to follow, the poor guy could have saved $31 million in taxes for that year alone. Sad-faced Donald. Who gets the shaft? Well, who do you think? The working poor and charities. The working poor would see no benefit in this new tax plan. Their lives remain economically difficult and insecure as ever. Couple that with the health insurance rates set to go up by as much as 20% in 2018. And side note, if you're in the poorest segment of our population, you might want to stock up on lube. If you run a charity, you might look forward to less revenue coming in. Have you been struggling to make ends meet? Well, not to worry. Your revenue will likely go down under the GOP tax plan. And since poor people will not have any relief, you'll still have to serve the same number of people or more. What doesn't kill you, right? Now look, the snark factor is high here, but let's get real. This tax plan is crap. It enriches the wealthy while offering hackneyed tripe to the poor. When will we wake up and recognize that we're all getting screwed over by the GOP, by corporations, and the ultra-wealthy? We drive the economy, not them. We consume goods. We create jobs. We are the ones who deserve the tax incentives and the cuts, not the uber rich. The big lie is that economic policies like the ones being proposed work. They don't. Oh, and all this bullshit will increase the national debt by $1.5 trillion. So much for fiscal responsibility, Republicans. Get your fucking pitchforks, friends. Let's move on to something a little bit lighter. Terror. On Halloween, a young Uzbek native living in the U.S. legally took a rented truck and plowed down a bike path in lower Manhattan, killing 8 and injuring 11 more. His attack was a near-exact replica of ISIS-directed social media posts on how to inflict the most carnage with the least amount of suspicion raised beforehand. Now, prior to ISIS claiming responsibility, this attack was called an act of terror. Now, look, our thoughts and good wishes go out to all the people involved and to all the families, to all those affected, and to anybody who's been traumatized by this event. There's a larger question, though. What do we consider terror? Less than a month prior to the New York truck attack, a lone gunman opened fire from a Las Vegas hotel, killing nearly 60 people and wounding more than 500. Now, I, for one, didn't hear the term domestic terrorism bandied about very much. But wasn't that the shooter's ultimate goal? I mean, to kill, yes, but to instill fear and insecurity to all those nearby, is that not terror? Were his actions not a terrorist plot? Now, what makes the difference? Is it skin color? Is it religious affiliation? We claim righteous anger and want vengeance against ISIS and their supporters, but we're reticent to even approach the reality that the Las Vegas shooter had dozens of legally acquired firearms and thousands of rounds of ammunition, and more than a dozen of those weapons were outfitted with bump stocks to maximize lethality. So are we misplacing our fear of terrorism? Are we willing to stifle our anger at the terrorists if it's a homegrown white guy? Well, mass shootings and terrorism will be the topic of an upcoming program. Oh, and there is so much more. Bo Bergdahl was sentenced by a military court this week. He received a rank reduction and a dishonorable discharge for desertion, but seems to have avoided prison time. Bergdahl left his post in Afghanistan and was captured by the Taliban and held for 5 years and ultimately released in 2014. Saudi Arabia has launched a massive counter-corruption initiative, arresting no less than 11 princes in this week on corruption charges. And this includes one of the world's richest men. Harvey Weinstein, Brett Ratner, Kevin Spacey have all been swept up in sexual assault or misconduct cases, and some of the charges could even lead to prison time. Trump landed in Japan for the first leg of a 5-country tour, presumably to ask why Asians like to eat raw fish and that their mountains are nice, but America has the best mountains. The GOP is quietly pushing through votes on 5 judicial nominees this week. Sneaky bastards. Look over here! Tax reform! Oh, and I almost forgot the oft-repeated non-scandal that is the Uranium One deal. And that one just pisses me off. More on that story will be covered in a show in the future. Yeah, it's so easy to look at things happening around us and simply tune right the fuck out. Don't. Our country is going through some of the most significant changes in our lifetime right now. It's okay to feel overwhelmed, and it's okay to not understand the details of every story. It's okay to take a break from the cycle every once in a while. What's not okay is to ignore where we are and where we're heading. We are the only bulwark against creeping authoritarianism and theocracy. The working class, the poor, we the people are real America. We are the people who matter. If any of these stories compel you to make your voice heard, contact your state representatives. Contact the House at 202-224-3121. That's 202-224-3121 for the U.S. House switchboard. And listen, don't be a jerk. Make your voice heard, but please remain civil. Also, take a minute to look up your representative before calling. Find them at house.gov/representatives/find. House.gov/representatives/find.
1, 2, 3, now!
Now, as always, thank you for listening. I'm your host, The Real MJC. Until next time, keep your eyes wide and your mind open. The James Chambers Show is a labor of love born from the need to feel connected to rational people with reasonable ideas from both sides of the aisle and to have some fun. We value you and your support. Feel free to leave a comment in the section below or contact the show and let us know how we're doing, or if there's a topic you want us to tackle. Reach out to realjcshow2017@gmail.com or tweet us at realjcshow. And thank you.